told him, "Change or I'm out," he smirked and packed his bags immediately. Little things are important, especially in a relationship. And I think I realized that too late, because I paid attention to the wrong little things and ignored the right little things. And that was what broke my relationship. I still can't believe it, that something so little and petty could break my relationship. My relationship with Scott was 4 years long when I figured out that he was going to propose to me. It was probably the happiest day of my life. I found out in the most common way that would make anyone laugh. I was going through his clothes and I saw an engagement ring in his jacket. I was so excited that I screamed for joy. I had been waiting long enough, but I had never said anything about it. And to know that he had it in mind and had even bought a ring to propose was just too much joy for me to contain. That day, when he came back, I couldn't exactly tell him that I found the ring in his pockets because that would take the fun out of the actual proposal. So I didn't say anything about it. Instead, I expressed my joy with my actions. I cooked his favorite meal, gave him a leg massage, and all the things I know he loves me doing for him. But hearing all these, you're probably thinking that our relationship was perfect, but it was far from it. Or to state that correctly, my behavior made our relationship imperfect. Scott worked a lot, and that meant he was almost always away from home. He was the type of person a coworker could call to help with a shift at work, and he would gladly take it. And that was what drew me to him at first, that and the fact that he was willing to go out of his way to help people, as well as his funny but functional type of dressing. But you know what they say, the reason you fall in love with someone is sometimes the reason you fall out of love with that person. When we started dating, I didn't see any of these things as a problem. He would work a lot, but he would still make time to come see me. He would still make time out for dates and hangouts. And I was satisfied with that, but I think things went wrong when he asked me to move in with him. That was a few months into the second year of our relationship. Before my discovery of this engagement ring, that was the best thing that had happened in our relationship, and I was so happy when he asked me that. It meant that he took us seriously. To me, it was a very high honor that showed that I was important in his life, and I didn't mince my words. I accepted with a joyful heart. He took 2 days off work to help with the move, and after I settled in, it was like I moved them with a ghost. The first week was manageable. He would leave for work early in the morning and return at night. But I was lucky enough to see him before I went to sleep. I was lucky enough to cuddle him. But barely a month after I moved in, things got worse. You would work till very late at night, and when he would return, I would have slept off. This went on for months. I could go an entire week without seeing my boyfriend, but somehow we were living in the same house. I didn't realize how better I had become because of this. I wanted him to be at my side more and more, but it seemed like he was prioritizing work over me. One night, I decided to stay awake, no matter how late he would return, and my goodness, he returned by past 12 a.m. I was tired because I was determined. When he came back, I had a conversation with him about him being so absent. He tried to explain and asked for just 2 more months, that he was working towards something, and that once he achieved it, he would be more present. But that felt like forever to me, and I could not understand the situation he was in. I became a nagging girlfriend. Whatever little chance I got with him, instead of us spending some loving time together and being in each other's arms, I'd give him a hard time by saying that he should have just slept over at work. I put him through a lot, and our relationship went through a dark period that began looking like it was a mistake for me to come live with him. But before I knew it, the 2 months he requested were up, and he was actually now more available. He had gotten promoted, and I was really happy for him. To celebrate, he took me to a fancy restaurant, and we spent hours just talking and laughing. It was like everything was fine again between us, and I felt happy with my relationship again. But the problem was never that Scott wasn't always around. It was that I was too ungrateful to see things from his point of view, and to see the amount of work he was putting into our relationship by making sure he came home, no matter how late. And my ungrateful nature showed its head again after a few weeks. We had been on a series of dates and hung out more times that week than we had in our entire relationship, and Scott wasn't stopping. He planned a picnic for us, and I was very excited. Other than family picnics, I had never been on a picnic with a boyfriend or love interest, and I was anticipating the picnic so much. But on the afternoon of the picnic, he told me that a friend of his had an emergency that she had to handle, so he had to take over for her at work. I could not believe it. I told him that we had things planned already, and he couldn't just push me aside for another woman. He tried to explain to me that it wasn't like that, but I did not care. In my eyes, he would rather help some girl at work than hang out with his own girlfriend. I told him that I now see how little he thought of our relationship and of me. He looked emotionally shattered by my words, and I was hoping that was going to make him stay back and go on the picnic with me like we originally planned. But that was not the case. No matter how much of a bad mood he was in, he didn't stay back. He left for work, leaving me completely shocked. I spent the entire day trying to wrap my head around what had happened. The way I saw things that day was that Scott had picked another woman over me, so he most definitely was cheating on me with her. I began developing bizarre theories in my head. The most predominant one was the thoughts that he might have been coming back home late because he was having an affair with her. The more I thought about it, the more riled up I became. That day I didn't even need to struggle to stay awake. My eyes stayed open like a torch whose battery never died. I was that way until Scott came back at night, and I was waiting to rain hell down on him that day. He came back home with flowers and chocolate in hand, but I didn't care. I felt betrayed, and I wasn't the type to let those who betrayed me go free. I accused him of cheating on me, and Scott was completely flabbergasted. He told me that what I was accusing him of was completely absurd, claiming that he didn't even have the time to sit down and eat his meal properly, so how was going to develop the time to cheat on me? It sounded so funny to him that he even laughed as he spoke. He tried to diffuse the situation, but his laughter and playful approach just made me angrier. To show how serious I was, I refused to talk to him after that, no matter what he did. This went on for a few days, until my mother told me that she wanted to see the man I was dating. That put me in a difficult situation because I couldn't just approach him and tell him that I wanted him to meet my mother when we weren't talking. I didn't want to take him either, but my mother didn't give me a choice. I had to invite him, so I walked to him while he was playing a game on his phone in the living room. He was honestly shocked I had walked up to him, but once he saw me, he put down his phone and gave me all his attention. I told him that my mother wanted to see him, and his reply to me was that he would come if I wanted him to come. The reply just got me furious. I asked him what he meant by that, and he told me that I had refused to talk to him for days, so he wouldn't be surprised if I did not want him to see my mother despite me asking. I was so mad back then, but looking at it now, it was a valid question, because now I know how petty I can be. Before I moved in with him, I once didn't talk to him for an entire week, because he introduced me by my name to his friends, instead of introducing me as his girlfriend. When he saw that I had gotten even angrier, he quickly apologized and told me that he would be more than happy to meet my mother. I was happy, and we were finally talking again, but all that meeting was going to do was just spark in your phase of problems in our lives. The problems began on the evening of the meeting, when we were getting dressed and preparing to leave the house. He wore something so simple that it just made me lose my mind. I asked him if he was going to a kiddies' playground, and he asked me what I meant by that. I looked for the most subtle way to communicate to him that I didn't like the way he was dressed, but all of that came out of my mouth was that he was dressed like a buffoon. He couldn't believe me. I had said it, and I wasn't the kind of person who would take back my words, so I emphasized on what I had said. I told him that I had been keeping quiet for quite some time now about your stressing, but I wouldn't let him embarrass me in front of my perfectionist mother. That statement sparked a whole lot of arguments that night. He asked me how long I had seen him as an embarrassment, and if I had any common sense, I would have found a way to ignore that question, but I didn't even an ounce of common sense, so I blatantly told him that I had always been embarrassed by him, and I didn't stop there. I told him that every single time we went out together, I was worried that people would look at me like an idiot because I was with him. He won't ask me if I thought I was too good for him, and my answer to him was that it seemed like it. Scott was furious, and I thought that fight meant we were definitely not going to see my mother that evening anymore. But Scott told me that we should just go meet my mother, since she would most probably be waiting. I told him I didn't want to go anymore, and he tried to talk me into going, but I was strong-headed. After several minutes of convincing, I finally agreed to go, but I told him that we had to go to the venue separately because I couldn't be in the same car as him. I left the house first and met my mother in the restaurant she was already waiting in. There was several scary and annoying thoughts jumping through my mind while I talked to my mother. I thought of the possibility that Scott would stand me up. Then I thought of the possibility that he would come still wearing the clothes Side scolded him about. That was probably because I was expecting him to change the outfit. After about 10 minutes talking with my mother and her telling me that she hoped Scott was handsome and established, he finally walking in. And to my own detriment, he was wearing the same clothes I was angry about. It wasn't that they were bad, but they were a bit too simply taste. I felt like getting up and leaving the restaurant, but I held that anger in. Scott joined us at the table and flattered my mother with compliments, telling her how much he had anticipated meeting her. My mother was utterly blown away. The next thing I heard her say was her telling him that he looked wonderful. You should have seen the stare he gave me. It was a kind of "I told you so" stare. They spent the entire night talking and laughing while I was just feel like the third wheel, being a grouch. What every couple wishes for was happening right before my eyes. My partner was getting along with my mother, and instead of being happy, I was bitter. I wanted to rip out Scott's tongue so badly, but I held myself back. And when we got home, I wanted to argue and fight with him, but I decided to give him the silent treatment. Our relationship was like this through the time we have been dating. There have been some good times when everything just felt perfect, but it has mostly been arguments and silent treatments and fights, which was why when I found the ring in his pocket, I was honestly shocked. It made me think that we were just like every other couple. I always used to think that we fought a lot, a bit too much even, but I suppose that's how every couple is. They fight and they reconcile, and for a moment I was worried that we were unlike any other couple and that there was no future for us. But this ring meant that there was a future. I became a different person after I saw that ring. I became nicer and calmer, and I tried to not flare up as much as I usually did. I tried to be a good girlfriend and be on my best behavior, but I waited for days, and those days turned into weeks, and soon it was a month, and still he didn't pop the question. The longer I waited, the more frustrated I became, and soon I was even more bitter than I had ever been. We were at home one day, just chilling, when he tried making romantic advances at me, and I was actively rejecting his advances. I charmingly asked him if there was anything he wanted to ask me, but he said there was nothing, and just before I lost my cool, his phone rang. He immediately picked it up and answered the call. His friend had an emergency and needed Scott to help him look after his 7-year-old son. Without even blinking, Scott agreed to help. I couldn't believe. I asked him what kind of man springs up from a sensual moment with his girlfriend to answer a friend's call, and his answer to me was jarring. He told me that we weren't doing anything, and that we were not going to do anything, so what was the need of him to keep trying? I was so mad. I felt like exploding. I began ranting at him and nagging nonstop, and he purposely ignored me. He walked to the wardrobe and began getting dressed, and to make matters worse, I added his dress style to the things I was nagging about. I asked him when he would start taking me seriously, and he told me that he had always taken me seriously, but I was never satisfied with anything he did for me. I was infuriated by that statement and told him that if he took me seriously, he wouldn't pick other people over me, and he will dress how I required him to dress. I emphasized on the fact that the way I wanted him to dress was better than whatever nonsense he had in his wardrobe. He sighed in exhaustion and told me that he needed to be on this way because his friend was waiting for him. He was clearly not in the mood to have that conversation with me, but I was all for it. I told him that if his friend wasn't able to take care of his child, then he shouldn't have gotten one. That was when I saw Scott lose it. He looked at me with devilish eyes that could bore a hole through a person. I was a butt scared, but I couldn't show it. To double down on my statement, I told him that I couldn't handle his behavior anymore, and his response was that he should be the one saying that, not me. I was baffled and hurt by that reply. In my anger, I then asked him why he bought an engagement ring if that was how he felt about me. He laughed and asked if that was why I was being nice some time ago. He said the engagement ring was for his friend that was getting married. He was the best man, so he was with the ring. I was so furious when I heard this. He told me that he was tired of fighting and reminded me that a child was waiting for him. In my attempt to exert my power, I told him, "You better change or I'm out of this relationship. I can't be with someone who doesn't value me above all else." He told me that what I wanted was a slave and not a boyfriend, and that I was too selfish. Then he turns to walk away. I told him that if he left the house, it was over between us. He just smirked at me, took a few clothes out of the wardrobe and packed into a bag, then left the house. I was left in shock. I couldn't believe that Scott would do such a thing to me. He chose to help other people. It has now been days, and he still has not come home. I would call any of his friends to ask if he is over at their place, but I don't have any of their numbers, which is very odd. I've dated Scott for a long time, yet don't have the number of even one of his friends. Neither do I know where any of them live. I always turned him down when he asked me to follow him to go visit his friends. I honestly didn't think Scott would walk away when I issued that ultimatum. But he did, and now I'm scared I've lost my man forever. Our relationship may have ended because of my stupidity. It isn't like Scott to disappear like this. Please, I need help. Somebody tell me what to do. I need to find him, and I need to get him back. I can't imagine life without him. Please, someone help me. Update. They say you don't know what you have until you lose it. Well, that has been my case these past few months. I didn't realize how much Scott meant to me and the value he had in my life, but now I do. The only problem is that it is too late. I've tried everything I can because I can't seem to get my boyfriend back. I've lost him for good. I know some of you might be saying that I have a defeated mentality, but that's not true. You have no idea the things I have done to get my boyfriend back, but nothing seems to work. The main problem at first was finding him. For days I wasn't able to read Scott. I tried calling, texting, and emailing him. At some point, I even tried tracking him. I went to his workplace to ask if anyone had seen him, but none of them knew me, so nobody wanted to diverge any information about their coworker to me. And I could understand it. After all, safety is necessary. I know you're probably wondering how none of my boyfriend's cool workers knew who I was, well added to the list of things that I did wrong during my relationship. I never hang out with his coworkers, followed him to some sort of work dinner. I just kept myself. That means I never went to see him at work either. I know what you're thinking right now, that I'm a terrible person. A lot of you expressed that in the comments during my last post. But I assure you I'm not a terrible person. I'm just misunderstood, that's all. If I was not much of a terrible person, would I have put in so much work trying to find Scott? And believe me, I put in a lot of work. I contemplated going to the police at one point, but I was worried about being dragged into a police investigation. Instead, I decided to conduct an investigation of my own. I knew how much Scott likes to work, so I would go to his workplace after I closed from work in the afternoon and stalk his workplace till late at night just so I could see him. And after almost a week of falling asleep while stalking his workplace, I finally saw him leaving work late one night, and I hurried to approach him. But then I saw a girl calling at him with a big smile. She had a car and she was waiting by it. My brain began to run marathons. He couldn't have possibly found a new girl already. We dated 4 years, and he couldn't replace me like I am nothing. I was getting frustrated when all my efforts kept leading to dead ends, but now that I finally found him, I was even more frustrated. I think I preferred looking for him without finding him, and to think about the toll finding him had taken on my work life. I had to work while I was looking for him, and it was difficult to juggle the both of them at the same time, especially because I had to stay up till late waiting outside his workplace. Then I'd have to go to work in the morning. And this is the result I get? I was so angry that I approached him and the girl angrily. I was seconds away from harassing her when I heard her say that their mother is going to be furious that he missed her birthday. That was his sister. I had seen pictures, but I had never met her in person, and I felt like a terrible person all over again. Perhaps Scott was right. I wanted a slave, not a boyfriend. I couldn't bring myself to approach them anymore, so I just left. I have been sad since that day, and life isn't any easier. I can't afford to pay for the house alone, and the only choice I have is to move into a smaller place, like where I was living before we moved in together. But I don't want to. I feel like I'm clinging to something I pushed away, but I can't help it. But now I realize that I need to work on myself, which is what I intend to do. This is my last update. Thank you all for putting up with me until now. Bye.